At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Waiting for Black Friday appliance deals? Don't! Get to Bray Day at Bray & Scarf this Saturday, November 8th for Black Friday pricing 3 weeks early. While the rest of the world is waiting, you'll be saving. Save up to 40% on select appliances. Plus, get free basic installation on select GE Profile, Cafe, and Monogram built-in appliances. Bray Day is happening this Saturday for 1 day only, so don't miss it. Shop local at Bray & Scarf, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I'm very honoured today to be joined by Katharine Quarmby, author of a new historical novel, The Low Road, set in the kind of the Regency Napoleonic War era, 1813. A story of kind of hardship and struggle and love found in the most kind of dire of circumstances, and about the kind of the sort of the brutality of English life at that time, with kind of transportation and all of these sorts of things. But firstly, welcome, Katharine. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me.
So firstly, tell us a little bit about the book.
So The Low Road is set in Georgian Norfolk, so just after the Napoleonic Wars, and moves then to London and looks at some of the institutions that poor people ended up in at the time, and then eventually moves to Australia in that kind of great swathe of people who got transported to Australia from 1780s onwards, 162,000. So it's based on a true story from my hometown in Norfolk, and it follows the story of a young girl who was orphaned, cruelly orphaned, from my hometown, whose story sort of fell into invisibility, but I sort of excavated it by chance. And it's really the story of what happened to her, but novelized.
Okay. So this moment in particularly in rural England it's not an enjoyable time to be alive. Particularly, the Napoleonic Wars have had an enormous economic economic drain on the country in terms of taxation, and also Britain's lost a lot of its trade as a result of the war and as a result of kind of various Napoleonic blockades. And so throughout the Napoleonic Wars, there is a kind and afterwards there's a long economic slump and lots of hardship and poverty. I wonder in your kind of research, did that kind of really speak to you? I wonder.
Yeah, it did. So I read quite a lot of local newspapers at the time. So the story is set from 1813 to 1817 in rural Norfolk, and then obviously the main character does go back there briefly. But you see again and again, you see almost this is an age of austerity if we think about it in modern terms, and
Hmm.
laborers, agricultural laborers were having their wages cut, and at the same time, the church was relatively powerful. So the tithes that were being so that's a tenth of your wages, or a particular percentage of agricultural laborers' wages were being taken away to enrich sort of church and state.
Hmm.
And what was interesting in Norfolk and in other places is this is just before the rioters, so agricultural labourers rising up in different rural areas. But you could see that same dissent and people resisting at the same time, saying, "We don't, this isn't fair. What's happening to us?" And you had quite a big, obviously, East Anglia was sort of the coastal area that is nearest to where a lot of the Napoleonic Wars were fought. So
Hmm.
obviously you've got quite a high sort of impact in terms of disability, and in suddenly instead of a wartime economy when often you get paid better, suddenly there's a slump and there's men often quite disabled coming back from the wars as well. So there's
Yeah.
more labour and it's easier to pay people less.
Yeah. Yeah. And you this is a kind of an age-old kind of problem of labor surplus and wages. It's famously turned on its head after the Black Death, where suddenly laborers for one moment had the upper hand, and then obviously the king instituted the Statute of Labours and said, just just because you've got a bit of market power, don't get above your station now. Nobody's getting paid better, and peasants revolt. Um, what did you learn about? I mean, obviously the kind of the brutality of transportation. This is something I think perhaps if you're not listening to this in Great Britain or Australia, maybe this practice isn't as well known or understood. Maybe we should kind of do a little bit of exposition here for the audience. Tell us about transportation.
So in many ways, sort of transportation is the second pillar of the colonial system, in that you've got slavery, enslaving people for the enrichment of the empire. But the other bit of it was transporting unwanted people to other bits, so bits of the world that could suddenly have people sort of forced upon them. And that's a sort of double injustice because you have people being sent in exile. It's the largest forced migration of British people that has ever happened. So
Mhm.
they're actually sent away at the same time as enslaved people are coming here or being shipped to the Caribbean and other places. And to other places as well. So they were not only sent to Australia, but other places as well, including the US. But so it's an injustice for those people who are exiled, although they probably escaped being hanged, many of them. But also it's an injustice to Indigenous people who had countries, even
Yeah,
if that wasn't something that the empire recognized, and suddenly there was all these people being forced upon those countries, and that certainly was the case in Australia, and particularly in Tasmania, where there was effectively a genocide of Indigenous people there, which was horribly successful. So it is a horrible injustice. At the same time, it is the beginning of the modern trade union movement in Australia. And because you had so many political dissenters, it's now thought 1 in 10 of the people who were transported were political dissenters of one kind or another. They become very important very quickly and start to organize. So that's another interesting turn of the wheel, I suppose. But transportation is this incredibly unrecognized part of our colonial history, I'd say, in the UK.
yeah, absolutely. And a part when that in kind of I suppose kind of Anglo-Australian relations uh, that kind of rarely actually gets spoken. I mean, certainly not here anyway. Um, and the punishments that were meted out on people, I find that the Georgian era particularly interesting in a very, very gruesome way for the things you could get hanged for, to put it bluntly.
Mm.
Um, I remember when I must have been, I was very, very young, and we in a school trip, and this is one of these kind of moments where you think, oh, you know, there's something interesting here. We went to Beaumaris Jail in North Wales, where the near where all the slate mines are. This was the school trip, and I remember finding a woman. We went to the archivist was there with us. It's not a proper jail, by the way, listeners. If you think I had some terrible childhood, um, it's a museum. I didn't actually go to a jail. But the archivist went through the books, and she found a woman who was transported to Australia for stealing a felt hat.
Wow.
And you think at the time I was thinking that seems excessive, and then you look at what people were hanged for. Um, and my theory is that this kind of explosion in executions. I think there were Tyburn, where Marble Arch is now. I think something like about 50 or 60,000 executions happened there throughout over an 80-year period. So several every day. And I always often wonder what explains this kind of explosion of state violence. And I have some theories, but I wonder what you think.
I mean, it was a very judgmental age, wasn't it? In many ways. So you had at the one time you had state violence, I suppose you could call it, which is what public executions are. It's a sort of show of the power of the state. And on the other hand, you have the beginning of these philanthropic institutions that
Mhm.
funnel people who they think can be reformed into a sort of a life of servitude. So
Yeah,
it's both at the same time, isn't it? But it is an age of real judgment.
yeah,
Um, and but it's also the age where mercy starts to be shown as well. And you
right.
have pardons, and you have, with transportation, you have this ability to commute quite a lot of those sentences. So, as you said, a woman stealing a felt hat. Usually, you got transported for your second offence, actually.
Mm,
But she was maybe it was a very expensive felt hat. But if you'd done two offences, and for most of the women who went, the 26,000 women who were transported, they were mostly sent for crimes of against the person or crimes of robbery,
mm,
larceny, rather than prostitution, as was sort of talked about, until more recently. But there was definitely a sense that this was a more merciful
mm,
act. And the beginning, perhaps, of Quakerism as well meant that there were these institutions that would at least funnel off the reformable
yeah,
at the same time as having this massive threat from the state, which is we can hang you
yeah.
at the same time, and in very gruesome ways, as
Mm,
you would literally have every part of anything that you wore would be torn off you and sold after you've been hanged. And there were obviously the pamphlets that were distributed giving the tales of people who'd been condemned in Newgate and then what had happened to them afterwards. So
mm.
it was a very bloodthirsty age, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and the kind of and entertaining spectator sport as well. I mean, there was an argument. I haven't read the various different perspectives on this in the historiography, but I think an argument that seemed to be quite robust is that a lot of this is to do with kind of the pressures of urbanization. Suddenly you have people flowing from the land into these booming towns and cities, which are growing in all sorts of higgledy-piggledy ways. And actually, an 18th century city is not it's not quite as segregated in terms of wealth and poverty in the way that a 21st century city is. You have poor and rich living cheek by jowl, and so poor people steal pocket watches from rich people, and
Yeah.
you have this new wealth that is born of things like the slave trade and cotton and sugar and all these sorts of things, and this new wealth that wants to protect itself, and the way they see like if you're a Georgian gentleman or lady in this city with, the great unwashed with you, um, it might be the first time you've had that experience of being surrounded by lots and lots of seemingly alarming poor people, and the state then acts as the kind of the enforcer of property rights, which it kind of always is, really. Um, but that's one way of looking at this kind of explaining this upsurge of violence.
Yeah, and obviously there were specific crimes which were about robbing the person. So if you were a servant and you robbed from your master, that was a specific crime that was treated very, particularly harshly. So that again speaks to that theory, I think, that, on the whole, the state is enforcing the laws of property at this time.
Yeah,
And it's the age of industrialization, isn't it? And very desperate, poor people, as you said, moving into London as this. In Georgian times it was about 10% of the population. It was something massive, wasn't it? Lived
yeah.
in London or moved to London. So London was literally being built as the Georgians were living there. It was changing rapidly.
And I noticed in the book that there is quite a lot said about this idea of being trained for service. Service is I think a really key facet of understanding in the 18th, 19th, and even 20th centuries working class life and class relations in Britain. But from your research, how were young women treated when they were trained for service and went into service?
Howdy, partner. Next time you get chicken at McDonald's, you won't have to choose between the creamy flavors of ranch and the tangy kick of buffalo any longer. This time, enjoy all the flavors you love all at once. Try new creamy and tangy buffalo ranch sauce at participating McDonald's for a limited time.
You want Black Friday prices without the Black Friday crowds. Lowe's gets it. We check the calendar, and Christmas is coming early. $99 is all you need to grab your favorite select 7-foot pre-lit artificial Christmas tree for the holiday season. And don't sweat what gifts to get Dad, because we've got up to 40% off select tools and accessories. That's how Lowe's celebrates Black Friday early. Selection varies by location, while supplies last.
Want to make a difference in your community but not sure how? Go to GoFundMe.com right now and start a GoFundMe. Seriously. Your next fundraiser doesn't have to start in a school parking lot or a church basement. You can start a GoFundMe today in just minutes. Fundraise for yourself, a friend or family member, or an organization. All that matters is that you care about them. GoFundMe is the trusted place to fundraise for what you care about. With no pressure to hit your fundraising goal, but tons of tools to help you reach it, you can confidently start fundraising right now. Whether it's creative, local, or critical, your cause matters. And there's a reason why GoFundMe is backed by millions and chosen by fundraisers everywhere. It works, and it matters. GoFundMe helps you make a real difference. Start your GoFundMe today at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
I mean, from the testimonies that I read from the Refuge for the Destitute and the history that I read around that, um, if they kept, even if they kept their heads down and wanted to say, go from being a scullery maid upwards through the ranks, to say housekeeper, in a say upper middle class or aristocratic household, they could still be preyed upon all the while, and I think that's something that you'd see again and again in history is girls getting into trouble, or rather being got into trouble, probably by men who force themselves upon them. And that's really clear as girls getting pregnant, and then it's just before the Foundling, before Thomas Coram, the seafarer, opens up the Foundling, what is now the Foundling Museum, but I think was called the Foundling Hospital, where young women who had had a baby and they couldn't look after the baby could put it in a hatch at a certain time of day and get rid of the baby, and leave a token. It's in the hopes they could collect. And that, the fact that you have all these institutions for fallen women, there were several of them, being instituted at that time, shows you that there was a need. There was both demand and supply, unfortunately. And a lot of that would have been servant girls who had no choice about the fact that they got pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. yes, it is. It is, and the kind of the basic injustice of that, the staggering kind of injustice of that, is sometimes it's hard to it's kind of difficult to compute in a way, but it's also even more doubly difficult to compute when you consider that these sorts of things happening were not kind of random happenings. They were there was a it was a systemic. You put poor girls in the homes of wealthy families where there is and they are utterly disempowered. Nobody really. I mean, if it's not there, then the future is something like prostitution. That to survive. So they're kind of considered to be jolly lucky to not be on the streets. And when you put it like that, you think, oh, and this all still happens, by the way. There is this is in the 21st century what we think of as modern slavery. It is around us. And you've got in the story, there's a gay relationship, isn't there? Two women meet and fall in love in again in the sort of the training institute for girls in service. And tell us a little bit about that and the writing of that.
Yeah, so I follow Anne, this orphan girl who's called Hannah in the Low Road, to where she ends up in London, and she's sent by the good people of my hometown. They took up a collection and they sent her to this training institute, which was called the Refuge for the Destitute. It had only been going for about 10, 15 years before she arrived. It was relatively new and it was set up by philanthropists who were sort of a new invention at that time. So Georgian philanthropists that didn't really exist as a thing before Georgian times, interesting enough. And they slept in dormitories, so girls in one, boys in the other, and they slept in hammocks, which is really hard to understand. It's like I think it was because it was easier to sweep underneath, but I have this vision of them kind of like unhooking their hammocks and sweeping underneath every day. But what is really clear from the sort of historians who've looked at the records of the Refuge for the Destitute, which I also looked at in the Hackney archives, because you can see all the archive records are still there, is you could see that there was a very clear sense of girls falling in love with each other. And there's one quite interesting entry, which is about another girl who complains that she was led into vice by other girls in the Refuge for the Destitute, and this becomes quite a sort of mini scandal within the walls of the Refuge as to who has sort of led her astray. But it was very clearly something that the girls were doing with each other and were definitely falling in love with each other. And in both the book and in real life, Hannah gets sent into service and she only stays there for 6 weeks and is dismissed by her mistress for being idle, impertinent, and dishonest, which I think is kind of marvelous. And she goes back to the Refuge, and I think that's partly because she has this very deep friendship with someone who's there and she doesn't want to be parted. And that's echoed in witness statements in the Australian female work factories as well, where you had a similar pattern of women going into service and deliberately doing things that were wrong so they could be sent back to the work factory to rejoin whoever they were in love with or in a relationship with.
And if you think about it as well, even if it's my guess as well is even if it's somebody that wasn't in a relationship, the experience of going to a Georgian family, unless you got a particularly nice one, and arguably if you're a girl in service, there aren't any nice ones because they're not going to be nice to you probably. If you think about the loneliness of that and the being torn away from your little family that you've made with the other girls, there might be someone really special that you have feelings for. But there might not be. It might just be they're your mates and they're the only people you've got.
Yeah. I agree. And there's something about, you're working in the refuge. They had a rudimentary amount of education, but mainly they were doing the laundry. It was really boring, and there was a different task to do every day with laundry, apart from the day of rest when they went to church. But they were fed quite well,
Mm,
and the work was monotonous, but it wasn't actually that hard. And
no.
they had quite a lot of free time to get up to mischief and have fun. And I think there's something you can see why you would definitely choose that over a life in isolated servitude, where you could be preyed upon by the master of the household as well.
Mm, yeah, and that's perhaps another very good reason to get sent back. Um, and I think if you looking at this question of kind of queer history, that we had a really great episode a few months ago about a gay relationship, female same-sex relationship, and it was fiction as well, Miss Veal and Miss Ham, and about life in the first half of the 20th century, and for that these things that are not allowed to be spoken of, and it just I think a couple of things are the case. I think firstly, there are long periods in history actually where people are probably not especially bothered by questions around sexuality. You look at the Stuarts, and their views on it is really very interesting. Of it's what you do. And in the times of intense religiosity as well, bisexuality amongst men was considered, well, sort of, it's just a thing. um but also there are moments where, throughout all of this, since the beginnings of the species, there have been same-sex relationships, but the extent to which they are allowed to be open, allowed to be acknowledged, the extent to which anyone cares, the extent to which they are suppressed or medicalized or put under some kind of microscope, it tells us less about sexuality and more about the society that we exist in at any given moment.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think I'm not sure I would have integrated it as a strand if it wasn't already there,
Yeah.
because the history very much showed it was there, it was true, and and that it was punished very severely if it was a gay relationship between men. It was obviously punished much more severely at this time, as you say. But if you were a woman, to some extent, either people didn't believe it was happening, or if something was happening, they thought you were probably reformable, and it was just a bit like, oh, this is terrible. Let's stop this happening and let's get the girls nicely married off. But at the same time, in Australia, it became much more extreme in that in the female work factories, as I said, people would dismiss themselves from service to get back to relationships, but they also dressed in a particular way. So they would, a bit like butch and femme now, you would have, women dressing in a more butch way, and then you'd have women dressing in a much more dainty way. And that's absolutely there in the archives. And in fact, they became what was known in a particular female work factory as the flash mob. And that is the first time that the word flash mob appears in the parlance. And it's so
Right.
interesting that it actually comes from the Australian female work factories. And it's the original Oranges is the New Black, is what I would say, is they were ribald places full of illicit relationships, full of love and loyalty.
Mm.
And at the same time, the friendships that were made there, you can very much see this in the work that's been done by the descendants of female convicts, is that they had long, long friendships with people, that the people they met on board the ships that took them, and in the places where they were either assigned as servants or in factories, they stayed friends with them for years. And there's something so wonderful about the tenacity of
Yeah.
sort of human bonds, I think, even in real severe hardship. And that also is about, those same-sex relationships, but it's also just about, these deep relationships of all sorts, I suppose. And it's paying tribute to those, I think, it was wonderful to be able to do that in the book.
That sounds really special, and that's the sort of thing I think that great historical writing is made of. The ability to find those kinds of those kinds of lasting human bonds and that human tenderness that exists when it's very, very easy to write about all the dark stuff. I remember on the question of like kind of sexuality and openness and closetedness. There's a really great bit in Juliet Gardiner's History of the 1930s where she talked about gay life in working class London. And she said, there were these back-to-back terraced houses where, a little cobbled lane runs between them in like the East End and things like that, where everybody knows everyone's business, and everybody knows, when there are young men meeting in the alleyways and things like that, and you can't evade this sort of surveillance. But it's kind of everyone knows, no one says, and sort of no one really cares, and there's this idea of like kind of the open secret. You can know if you want to, but nobody is really. There's a kind of an omerta almost, and I wonder if that's perhaps what's happening in the factories.
Yeah, I mean, it would occasionally explode in the archives when something particularly bad happened. So you'd get, there was actually some proceedings about one of the female work factories in Australia where, again, there was an allegation by one woman that she was being coerced. And of course, that if that was true, that was obviously taken very seriously. But then there were lurid tales about what was happening in the blocks late at night after supervisors had gone away. But I think on the whole, I mean, nobody cares as long as there's order. The point about one of the particular ones in the Cascades Female Factory is that one of the most absolutely openly butch women was also fantastic on social justice and broke out of the factory at one point to get people bread and meat. So you do get that sense of here's someone who is absolutely about more than the sum of her parts, and she's a real character who I mention in passing, and she's sort of one of those people who you could write a whole book about. And yeah, I think on the whole, I think people just thought turn a blind eye, because if it keeps people happy, who really cares? So I'm sure that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a great much of human history has pivoted on that one very question of, well, who cares? But that other individual, perhaps that's a project for later, maybe. So if they're kind of note. So we must finish in a moment, but before we do, let's give the book a bit of a plug. So currently available or awaiting publication date?
Tomorrow it gets published in paperback, but it's already available as an ebook, audiobook, and so on as well. So yeah, that's the big day for me.
Great. Well, I will put a link to the book in the show notes. As we always say every single week, whenever we're talking about a particular book, please buy it from an independent retailer. More independent, the better. If you can't get it from an independent retailer, go directly to the publisher, and it is published by iBooks. So obviously we encourage that, because once all these little outlets and publishers have been gobbled up, they're never coming back. So we've got to preserve them. They're the ecosystem that makes books like The Low Road possible. And you'll miss them when they're gone. So Katharine, it's been a wonderful chat today. It really has. It's been so fascinating to talk about this period. and this, there's really, really hard times, but kind of resistance as well, and the ability of people to endure, which is, I guess, what I read history books for.
Absolutely, and it's a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Best of luck with the book tomorrow, and take good care, and maybe we'll speak again about such things in the future.
Sounds lovely. Thank you.
Take good care now. All the best.
Bye.
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 For 25 years, Brightview Senior Living Associates have been committed to creating a vibrant culture and delivering exceptional services, making Brightview a great place to work and live. If you're looking for a rewarding opportunity to serve your local community and grow, we want you to join our team. Brightview Senior Living is growing and actively seeking vibrant associates to join our community teams, including directors, healthcare, activities, hospitality, and dining. Apply today at careers.brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal employment opportunities. Text BV Jobs to 97211 to apply.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.